Well, I'll tell you what, kid, we're going to call this an optional video lecture, partly because people just like to look at art. It's not art history is not really my strength, although I've tried to develop more of an interest and more of an insight to it. The Renaissance does not play a huge role in AP world history. It was in some ways, fairly small movement. It was a movement in which artists began to see things differently. There's something sort of about the spirit of individuals that start to think of themselves as individuals and not just part of Christian communities, etc. But it doesn't play a huge role in the AP World History course. It does certainly in the AP European History class. But really, what we're going to do is run through a couple sort of basic things to give you an idea what the Renaissance was and wasn't, and mainly just kind of look at some art. So in this case, there's no need to take any notes. And in fact, if some of you just don't have the time to watch it, I'm okay with that, but it might be worth kind of taking a look through. Generally speaking, the so called early Renaissance, and I might say the 1490s is a little bit too late. Keep in mind, this is just kind of a basic idea. It's not like somebody woke up on January 1st, 1300 and said, "Hey, Giovanni, what you doing today? Not too much. You want to start the Renaissance? Oh, yeah, I've been thinking about starting. Oh, I cannot. I get my hair cut today. Oh, we come back Tuesday. No, no, Tuesday worse than today. Friday, we start the Renaissance. And, oh, Renaissance over. Yes, let's stop the. It doesn't happen like this. Um, Generally speaking, throughout European history, we'll move on to the next slide. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. This isn't going to lead us. This is leading us into some very specifics about Renaissance art. But yeah, the Renaissance itself was just kind of as things happened, people started looking at things a little bit more differently. In a later lecture, we'll talk about that. A couple of the technical innovations. What makes Renaissance art so realistic? And a lot of this you're going to be familiar with from any art class you've taken. The idea of linear perspective, having a line here. Now, we know that these train tracks that you see on the right side, that they seem much wider closer to us. Well, that's just an illusion, of course. So we are suggesting that things disappear off into the future. Chiaroscuro, that simply means dark and light, and mixing them together and sort of blending them creates an illusion of distance and so forth and depth. The mere fact that this part of the ball that you see on the bottom is darker suggests that that must be the farther away from the eyes. Sfumato, the idea to have movement happening, it's not clear lines between this is the body and this is the background. The fact that there's a subtle blending suggests that that figure is alive, suggests that motion is happening. And you might notice from some of the old paintings and drawings, like the Egyptian pharaoh paintings, the old Egyptian hieroglyphics, people stand in one position artificially. And you'll see through a lot of this Renaissance painting that people are holding and posing in a very natural way, looking in one direction, but the elbows moving in another, and the hips are in one direction. You might right now stop and ask yourself, are you standing or sitting in a completely upright way with your entire body pointed in one direction? Or is your body all over the place as you're standing and looking and listening? Yeah, you see examples of all of these, the linear perspective. You can tell which parts of these buildings are closer and farther away from each other. The light and the dark that you're seeing in both of these paintings suggest another way of which is closer to you. The blending, you look at this baby Jesus down here. You look at this baby Jesus, and that is not a stationary figure. That child, an eighth of a second from now, will be in a different position. You can feel the child is squirming. That would be an example of sfumato. And again, contrapposto. The head's looking one way, the body's moving another direction. Much more natural, much more real. This is what I'm talking about. This is from the 7th century. And again, you can say, I think this is beautiful, awesome art. You can prefer it to everything. What you can't say is, gosh, it seems that much more natural. Stop the film for a second if you want to slow this down and ask yourself, what doesn't seem natural about it? Now, things that people often come up with. These don't look over on the left like particularly unique soldiers. They are, in essence, all the same person for the most part. Notice the way everybody is standing, directly upright, directly at the painter, which isn't that realistic. You'll notice the background. Well, there isn't a background. How far is that red color behind them? Well, it could be 500 feet. It could be 2 inches. You have no way of knowing. You look at the feet, which are absolutely artificial. And by the way, there's no name on this. If you were a painter in the 7th century, you wouldn't put your name on the painting, again, any more than the guy that installed your toilet would write his name on the bottom of the toilet. You were doing a job probably for a church. Here we are as far as about the 13th century, particularly on the left. This is St. Francis of Assisi, and you can see there's been some developments, but there's nothing particularly realistic about this. You notice there's no contrapposto at all. There's no sense of movement. You get a sense probably of St. Francis of Assisi, if you were to come back in 2, 5, 20, 50, 200, 500 years, that hand would still be standing there and he'd be staring at the same thing. Also, behind him, well, there are a bunch of images, but he's literally as tall as the house, and feet don't look like that, etc. Yeah, here's a close-up view of this. Notice, by the way, a small area. Hey, what's wrong with these birds? I mean, they're lovely birds. And again, if you think this is the most beautiful painting you've ever seen in your life, you're not wrong about that. Well, first of all, notice that the guys are about, 3/4 the size of that building, which is pretty unusual, unless it's a miniature building, which I'm sure it isn't. Also, birds are not particularly cooperative. They don't normally stand in neat little triangles all staring in one direction. Well, let's take a look what the earliest of the Renaissance artist, Giotto, what he did with the story of St. Francis of Assisi. Now, this is not a, oh my God, is this a painting or is it real? Oh, it's a painting. Not at all. The background is not there. How far away is that mountain? Well, it could be 20 miles, it could be 15 feet, sort of hard to say. But let's look at some of those details. What are you seeing that suggests we are moving toward a more realistic painting? Let's look at some of the details. That face. That's a very unique face. There's human emotion in it, to be sure. The hands. Those hands aren't going to be standing there, staying in that same position if you come back in a week. Notice that even the pinky is bent in an unusual way. That's a hand in motion. These birds are doing what birds do. What do birds do? Whatever they damn well please. They stand, they stare in any direction, they crook their heads, etc. And again, if you go back and compare that to the 7th century feet or even to the 13th century feet, Giotto, who's often called the father of Renaissance art or the first pre-Renaissance artist or the guy that first takes some of these new techniques and turns them into more realistic paintings that others build upon. So here we have the gates of paradise, and you know what? It's nice. It's tremendous. Somebody could do that with a hammer and chisel and so forth, and do this into a great big stone wall. Now, if you look at the images, they're not that realistic. Oh my God! Here we are, a couple hundred years later with brass, and look at the detail. Again, this is carved into brass and molten in and so forth. We don't know what's behind these characters. We simply know that there must be something behind them. Here on the right, we know with the door of paradise. You know what? You could mathematically measure exactly how far it is from the figures at the front to the little pavilion that you see there, the little building, from the beginning of the building to the back end. You can mathematically determine exactly where everything is in relation to itself, and that's using linear perspective. David, of course, we know the story of David and Goliath and so forth. And yes, at 1200, we do have a sculptor who left his name behind, and Ptolemy his name was. And, faces don't quite look like that. I'm not seeing much of an elbow exactly, but you get the idea. David is sharpening his sword to cut the head off the giant. Well, here in the 1430s, and here is probably your best example between early Renaissance and the so-called High Renaissance. Look at the detail, the contrapposto. Look at that's a young man. It's a perfect young man, kind of a naked young man at that, standing on the head of a giant, but he looks real. I look at the elbows between the two of them, and that's a real body. Now, what tends to make something high Renaissance? Well, partly Donatello and the earliest Renaissance artists were largely in Florence or Firenze. The center of art and culture moved to Rome, and largely because the church was starting to sponsor it. But of course, Michelangelo's David, many of us know. This thing is, by the way, absolutely huge. By the way, keep your eyes up. Don't look at certain parts. Michelangelo's David, I believe, is something like 7 or 8 meters high. If you see it in person, it really is pretty stunning. And the amount of detail, not that, is pretty remarkable if we take a closer look. Again, look at the tendons in his knee and his calf. Again, if you were to blur your eyes a little bit, you would look at this and say, is that a, wow, I guess it's just a sculpture, but it could be real. Notice, by the way, that is almost a perfect man, perfectly strong, muscular. Take a look on the right, though, even the veins in his hand. And you go back to the last image of David from 1200, you couldn't imagine something like this. The crookedness of the fingers, the little details, the veins in those wrists. I mean, that's capturing what a human being is. And high Renaissance, gigantic scale, overwhelming scale, almost perfect human beings. The David of Verrocchio in the 15th century, well, he's a young boy, beautiful in his own way, but this is a powerful, almost perfect man. There's almost an arrogance to the Renaissance art scene by this point. Yeah, some of these names, again, mainly centered in Florence. Again, for this class's purpose, you don't need to know any of this, but it's nice sometimes to see. Again, Giotto, we see some of the detail. This is so much more realistic than what we were seeing even 100 years earlier. But of course, again, there are issues. These trees, how far behind them are they? We don't know. These people in the audience, well, they're kind of floating in the air. Simply the technology was not there. This is a computer from 30 years ago that, performed certain calculations, but not as efficiently. Amazing. Hey, I got my first calculator about 1972, and I couldn't believe it. But if you added up numbers, if you multiplied 3,640 times 3,112, you would get a bunch of E's on it because it couldn't handle something that went beyond, I think it was 7 digits. So, again, it's a step in that direction. Donatello, we've already seen. He did a lot of busts of people. Do notice the one on the left. This is, by the way, almost all art before the Renaissance in Europe was sponsored by the church. That's who did this. People didn't sponsor private art. But Italy, which is not a country at that point, it's a bunch of city-states, largely because the Crusades went through Italy, and that brought people in to set up inns and restaurants and to service the Crusaders going through. They started to have small cities, and the cities started to develop their own infrastructure, and there started to be rich merchants living in these areas. And these merchants, like this guy on the left, I used to know who that was, he wanted a well-known sculptor to paint, to form his bust, to do a sculpture of him in his face. And again, pretty darn realistic. It's not a perfect face, but all the details. Take a look between his lips. You actually see that little fold between the two lips. You start seeing lines, you start seeing wrinkles, you start seeing, the very distinct eyes. And Donatello, if he was doing another bust of another major merchant, it would look entirely different, unlike in Ravenna a few centuries earlier, where all the soldiers were just carbon copies of each other. Masaccio is thought to have been noticed. He died at the age of 27, which is pretty remarkable. But he is thought to be the first of the Italian painters to really master linear perspective. This is 100 years after Giotto. But here, you can absolutely measure. You look in the middle, and you can say that building is exactly this tall, and these two people are a certain number of meters behind each other. You really, if you look at giant Masaccio's, it is mathematically organized so that everything is exactly in its place. Again, another one, the realism of this. How far is it from the men to the first trees? You could mathematically calculate that. How far apart are the two trees? You could mathematically calculate it. It was all done with geometry, with drawing lines, so everything was in the right place. And here we see the so-called vanishing point, that everything is focused directly on Jesus's head and behind him. That's exactly the center of the photograph, and lines are being drawn between all of them to indicate that that is the center. Montaigne, man, this is some really fun stuff. And again, this is pretty wild, pretty dreamy, pretty modern, you might say. The one on the left is just kind of intense to me. You see all these images, but boy, by this point, you want to know how far away that farthest hill is in the right. Man, I'm telling you, somebody that knows Italian geography would say, oh, that's probably about 63 miles or 97.4 kilometers or whatever else. Everything is laid out perfectly. See what's happening over on the right. I always thought this one was fun. This is the dome of a church. You walk into the center, you look up at the dome, and look what Montaigne did. He put a whole bunch of little angels and cherubs, and I think there's a peacock up there, just kind of looking down at you, waving down at you. Just a real fun painting. Coming up next, another Montaigne is one of the most intense paintings I've ever seen. Wow. The lamentation, the sadness over the dead Christ. Now, again, we go back to the early Jesus images, and look, he's just a flat figure. He's up on a cross. First of all, look at the people mourning over them, the looks of anguish in their faces, the emotion. Uh, Jesus himself, look at those feet and those hands. Look at those nails, those spikes that have been driven through his flesh. You can see the pain, you can feel the pain. It's almost visceral. And look also too, look, one would forgive Mantegna if he said, hey, I'm going to make a realistic Jesus from an intense vantage point, and then I'll throw a white thing over him as a cloth. Look at that sheet. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little tiny folds. That's what a sheet looks like. By this time, Mantegna, honestly, European painters' master paintings could almost capture the world around them, almost to any level of detail. Yeah, we've seen these, Ghiberti's Doors. If you want to, that YouTube thing, it's basically like a tour inside it, a virtual tour, just kind of interesting. Botticelli, you've seen some of these. I mean, again, you see the linear perspective, you see the sfumato, the blending suggesting motion. These figures are not going to be standing like this hours later. The light, the dark, contrast, certainly contrapposto. Very famous one in the bottom right, the Venus. What is that called? I forget what it's called, but basically the naked chick standing on the clamshell. You might remember that I mentioned earlier it is thought that the sister of Amerigo Vespucci, in fact, might have been the model for that particular painting. And again, these mean something, etc. Yeah, this was the first female nude since the classical era, going all the way back to Greece and Rome, which is where that was. Like it was thought to be wrong in the Christian world. Very, very shocking painting because there was a naked human body in this, and that became, of course, more of a norm. I can't speak to what all of this stuff means, but this is some of the symbolism that an art historian has suggested is working here. We then have the so-called high Renaissance masters. The center of the Italian art world moves up to Rome, and Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, probably the most famous. Giorgione, there's just one painting I particularly like, so I included it. Titian has never done much for me, and what exactly mannerism is, it's kind of like a higher level, extra ornate, more technically proficient type of Renaissance painting. I don't really know myself. I think I was trying to learn that at some point and clicked that in as a reminder to myself. Da Vinci, of course, The Last Supper, painted on a wall in Venice. It says Florence. He's from Florence, but I believe this was actually in Venice. And if you take a look behind this, you see Jesus in the center, and there it is. There's the mathematical drawing behind it. The lines are absolutely perfect, and all eyes go immediately to that center. That is linear perspective. A couple of more famous paintings, of course, the Mona Lisa over on the left. On one hand, not that realistic in the background because people don't tend to sit around in chairs in front of that type of background. But again, the details are perfectly laid out. The Mona Lisa is breathing. I mean, you can feel this is not a stuffed character. This is a real human being here. You're certainly seeing the movement with Jesus and John the Baptist over on the right. It was never known. It was only in the last few years that art historians believe they have identified the model for the Mona Lisa. I forget the details behind it, but that is now a mystery that had kind of, oh, for about 400 years had been mysterious for people. And something you might do if you're on a laptop, walk around the room or even on a desktop and notice her eyes. She follows you absolutely everywhere you go. Part of the great mystery of the Mona Lisa. Again, it's a trick. All art is an illusion. All it is two-dimensional stuff with a bunch of colors and lines on it, and it gives you the illusion that you're looking at a real object or human being. Art is trickery, is what it boils down to. By this point, the artists had gotten really good at their trickery. The Amor Vetuvian Man over on the left. Remember that Da Vinci was not just an artist, he was a sculptor, musician, mathematician, inventor, scientist. The term Renaissance man really refers to him. It's somebody that can do a little bit of absolutely everything. There we are. Yeah, and you see from his notebook all the things that he was drawing, all the suspicions he had about what was inside the body, what the fetus looked like. He actually did some, wasn't terribly legal, but he actually managed with a friend from the cemetery to be able to do some dissections of human bodies. Basically, this endless energy, always curious, wanting to know more. I don't know what that deal is exactly. Again, this is something I did a long time ago, but he did actually invent a prototype for a helicopter. Now, this is 400 years before flight, obviously didn't get off the ground, but he had ideas about how that might actually work. Start looking at some of the architecture. This is St. Peter's Piazza at the Vatican. Absolutely fascinating. One of the neat things, if you look to the upper left, you can see all these columns here. If you stand right in the middle, you will see one column, one just a single front row of columns, but you move to the side and realize that the columns go back about 4 or 5 rows behind them. But you stand in the right spot, you see only a single column lining the outside. So again, it's perfectly symmetrical in every way. One of the highest freestanding domes in the world. I don't understand the technology behind it, but pretty remarkable that that anybody is able to do this. Raphael, this is a fun one. Now, Raphael only lived to be about 35 years old or so. And one of the keys to the Renaissance, the Renaissance figures had a saying, if we can see so far, it is because we stand on the shoulders of giants. And they're referring to the Greeks and the Romans. It's a little bit of a misconception that all Greek and Roman science and art and learning completely disappeared for 1,000 years from Europe, but it largely did as the church took over. The church said, look, these people were not Christians. We don't want to be paying attention to this. What you need to do is listen to your priest, and he will tell you what's in the Bible. So, although this was kept alive in some monasteries and certainly within the Muslim world, where the sort of default Muslim approach was, well, look, these men did not believe in the greatness of Allah per se, but they were born before Allah, and certainly God would not have put these civilizations here if they weren't there for our benefit. So, for the most part, the Muslim world did translate, did adopt this knowledge. The Crusades, of course, among many other results, brought this learning back to Europe. It got into the monasteries. People became more and more curious. As Europe becomes a little bit more urbanized and you have private merchants who are willing to pay to keep artists and scientists working, some of that learning comes out. And you see this through a lot of this stuff that looks very Greco-Roman. This in particular is called the School of Athens. And we'll look at a few details of this. First of all, in the center, the two great post-Socratic philosophers, you have Plato on the left and you have Aristotle on the right. And more detail than you would need, but Plato had a basic idea called the Platonic ideal. To simplify, the reality of a chair is not a chair in front of you. It is a perfect idea of what a chair is. In other words, he's pointing up at the heavens. He would not have believed in a God in heaven as in the Christian Bible, because that was 400 years before his time. But there's sort of an idea that there is something above and beyond this world that is more perfect. Aristotle was the founder of the earliest types of modern science, in which we said, look, if we don't see it, if we don't experience it, we can't trust it. Notice that while Plato is pointing up, Aristotle's saying, wait a minute, let's stay down here on the earth. And these are all some of the major great figures of Greek and Roman learning. Averroes was actually a Muslim scholar. You don't really see him in this painting. Pythagoras, the Pythagorean theorem, of course, etc. So very, very intentionally, you'll notice absolutely a Turkish, very Muslim man here. Perhaps that is Averroes there. I'm not sure which is which. But yeah, you're seeing like these honored statements toward these great masters. And over on the right, you're seeing Ptolemy, Euclid, geometry, Zoroaster, who is also a scientist. That would be representing of Zoroastrianism, of course, the scholarship, the religion of Iran, of Persia. By the way, Da Vinci, very much Plato, looks like him, supposed to be. This guy kind of sulking in the middle. Raphael had a major confrontation with Michelangelo, major rivalry. Michelangelo was apparently not a particularly fun guy, very antisocial, and very intentionally, as kind of a zing, Raphael actually paints Michelangelo as being this kind of dour, unpleasant type. Now, where is Raphael in all of this? Where is Raphael? Where is Raphael? There, second from the right, is Raphael looking directly at himself. You can tell, very young, very handsome man, apparently quite the ladies' man to be sure. Contrast with Michelangelo, who was about his art and didn't want other people around and didn't cooperate well and didn't have a lot of friends. Raphael was apparently the toast of the town, Mr. Fun Boy, etc. I don't know if that contributed to his early death or not. People died for a lot of reasons in those days. I always thought this painting, The Tempest, over on the left, this is Giorgione, again, high Renaissance considered. Just a very, very tense photograph. You see an art historian's argument that these little things like the broken pillar suggests that there is a story to be told behind it, the fact that you see those threatening skies. And there's even something up front of, the lovely motherly woman nursing her child in the front, but that very tense look on her face. And then what is this soldier doing over here? So, but again, you see all the things, the play of light and color and the contrapposto. Nobody is standing artificially. This is alive, it's moving. The linear perspective makes it seem very, very realistic. And we can look quickly at Michelangelo, who also, by the way, was an architect, and so he designed these buildings as well, in addition to his well-known paintings and even better-known sculpting. He considered himself, by the way, to be a sculptor and actually kind of resented painting. The thing is that painting is what paid the money. You see, for example, the Pieta. Pieta picture is Jesus with Mother Mary along with Jesus, and probably his most known sculpture aside from David. These two that you see on either side, though, this is something he was doing for the church. He got into a fight with the Pope and says, that's it, I'm not doing it anymore. These are supposed to be slaves that were going to be painted in, or going to be sculpted into the scene. And there's almost this wonderful little twist of history that he didn't finish them. And in a way, that adds to me a certain beauty. Like you can see these human forms breaking free on their way out, not quite there yet. So just, yeah, kind of intense. Like in a way, I think almost preferable that those didn't get finished or they just be another perfect sculpture. But there's a certain energy toward them emerging there. And of course, when it comes to painting, it took the guy 4 years to do this and apparently hated every second of it. This is in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. Yes, he lay up on top of a scaffold on his back and painted this year after year after year after year. Took him 4 years to do it and apparently hated every second of it. but by God, it was a commission and it was a good one. And it basically tells the whole story of creation and Christianity. You will see right in front of you, right in the center toward the top, you are seeing the apple that is being eaten in the Garden of Eden, etc., etc. Another image of it, the Last Judgment. Some of us sent to hell, some of us sent to heaven. Details of like abandoning the flesh. Again, kind of, not kind of creepy, very creepy, but you see there where that is in the painting. There's God creating the heavens, being upheld by the angels. And this is in some ways perhaps the most famous part of this. I should point out, I don't actually like Michelangelo's paintings. I prefer a lot of this other stuff. To me, there's just something about the style that does not move me at all. I'm not saying he wasn't a good painter. It doesn't move me very much. But this is kind of cool. This is the moment where God gives life to man. That's Adam over on the left. And notice God's finger has not quite touched Adam's. This is the moment of the creation of human life that he's trying to capture. And again, that's kind of a cool mechanism he uses. But yeah, overall, Michelangelo does just so much for me. Not surprisingly, it spreads. There is a Northern Renaissance. And again, nobody decides, hey, y'all want to start a Northern Renaissance? Oh, okay, I guess so. But as trade begins to happen, as ideas come, as Italian artists and poets and so forth start to move north, they're invited to the courts of kings in France and kings in the Netherlands and so forth. You start to see this happening. Um, for the most part, the Northern Renaissance artists tended to be, well, they say masters of technique and detail, of realism per se. We'll take a look at a few of these painters, a couple of the sculptors, etc. Often thought to be the first of the Northern Renaissance painters to really create realistic stuff. Jan van Eyck, not much is known about the person. Again, though, you take a look over there at the detail. How far away is the bridge on the left? All these little tiny details. Um, yeah, you can do what you wish with this. It doesn't really move me either way. Notice, by the way, that these are not necessarily religious figures. That is actually St. Jerome writing the Bible over on the right. But on the left, this is a wealthy merchant. The Netherlands, by the way, was the first most urbanized part of Europe, where people eventually were living in cities, and the merchants, more so than religious organizations, had the real power. And the wealthy merchants, well, they wanted themselves painted, so they got painted. In the Crucifixion, the Last Judgment, Jan van Eyck, pretty scary toward the bottom there. Another Van Eyck, and one that we've seen, and this is simply a wedding portrait of a young couple. Part of what's so remarkable about this, though, is just all the detail in it. And you can't quite see it here, but if you were to look closely into the mirror in the middle of the painting, you would see the backside of Giovanni Arnolfini and his wife reflected. Um, it would be understood at the time what all this stuff means. Why is there a little doggy at the bottom? Well, there's a reason for it. Yeah, there's our mirror. The dog, I believe, represented fidelity or something like that. Rogier van Weyden, I actually saw this one in the Prado this summer. And again, the tremendous amount of realism on people's faces. These are very, very detailed, real faces as Jesus is being taken. And here are some of the details. How that is a person just in agony. You can see the individual tears. You can see that all noses aren't shaped the same way. You're looking at that look on her face, the furrow in the brow, the sadness that she's feeling. And Quentin Massys, I don't even know what to say about this guy, so I'll just flash this up there. The Ugly Duchess. um, as I read about this, because I remember seeing this and saying, that cannot be a painting from 500 years ago. And it was. And apparently what he was making fun of was sort of a nouveau rich. In other words, folks that had sort of come into money and dressed themselves up, and older women that didn't let themselves grow old gracefully. They pretended they were younger and wore provocative clothing. And this is how he saw this looking. So this is definitely a in-your-face wealthy people who don't know how to age gracefully. But yeah, pretty intense little image that we see here. By the way, I forget exactly when this presentation ends, so at some point there may be no fare thee well. It may just be my voice stops. I'm getting pretty close to the end, I think, though. Albrecht Dürer, primarily known as a German artist, and a big part of what he was doing, some of it was paintings, and he loved to paint himself. And again, you're seeing all the detail, every strand of hair and every fold in his shirt, nothing that he couldn't capture. You see he just plays around kind of playfully in the back right corner. You'll see the linear perspective for sure. Particularly known for woodcuts. So he would carve into wood, and then ink would go on it, and then paper would go on top of that, and this is what would come off on the paper. So again, tremendous detail. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, once again, a woodcut, really what Dürer was best known for. Spent some time looking at animals. Again, with the printing press existing, people are starting to see these things. This was done from a description of a rhinoceros that somebody had sent back. Obviously, he missed some things. But again, the tremendous amount of detail that's there, that was a conception of what a rhinoceros would look like. Not too far off. And man, one of my absolute favorite. I got to see this painting, Hieronymus Bosch. I had often wondered, wait a minute, Hieronymus Bosch, he was Dutch. Why is that in Spain? Why is it the Prado Museum? And it took me years of wondering to figure it out. You'll recall that Charles I of Spain married and became Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, which meant that Spain controlled Central Europe, including parts of the Netherlands. And later, there were a whole series of wars over this where Spain tried to keep control of the Netherlands and they took the art back. So this really is an example of an imperialist power, a power coming in, invading, and stealing a people's artwork and taking it back. Um, this is part of a huge triptych. It's three different scenes all kind of mixed together. And what you're seeing here is the garden of earthly delights. You're seeing the joys of the day to day and people eating fruit and frolicking about naked, etc., etc. But, oh, I thought we had another part of that, but I suppose we don't. I meant to include another thing where you see what happens when the judgment comes. Here's the crucifixion. You see Jesus in the middle, and look at these ghastly, deformed, mean faces around him. Again, very intense stuff, very nightmarish, very 20th century in so many ways, the stuff you see from Bosch. Very different. Another Northern Renaissance artist, Pietro Bruegel. There are actually two of them, father and son. Very often, what they painted, and this is so unique, these were peasant scenes. These were the ordinary people of Northern Europe. These weren't simply the people at their lavish banquets. They were ordinary people living their lives, and some of the only images that we really have at this time period. Again, coming very close to the end of this, so you're going to get cut off pretty quickly. A peasant woman, imperfect in every way, missing teeth, jaw is not perfect, almost caught mid-sentence. And after you've been hanging out and eating too much pie and drinking too much mead, well, you just kind of collapse and go, for the night. And Bruegel was able to capture that.